Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sonically podcast, where music creators educate music creators. I'm Elmo, and today we have a very special guest joining us. Our guest is an American hitmaker who is responsible for a countless amount of hits with the best artists of our time, including Armin van Buuren, Nicki Minaj, and the Black Eyed Peas. But most notably, he was recognized as the producer for the Grammy Award winning album, The Fame Monster by Lady Gaga. And today he is here to talk to us about all things music and education, and we're super honored to have Fernando Garibay join us to tell us about his journey as a music creator. Welcome, Fernando.
Hey, Elmo. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I've just been super excited about filming this episode with you because, first and foremost, a fan of what you do. And when I heard about this new sort of path and this new sort of direction in your life towards education and really giving people a window into your world as a music creator. Just made me super ecstatic about the interview. I'm wondering if we could just sort of rewind back to the beginning of your journey. Did you grow up with music in your life?
Yes and no. I think, music as a discipline, no, but music obviously as cultural, yes. So I'm Mexican American, so I'm first generation, born in the States in the U.S., and so what that how that influenced me and inspired me, basically is, so I'm a product of, essentially German folkloric mixtures of music, right? When German and French came to Mexico, especially in our port state of Michoacan, which is where I'm from, Michoacan, Mexico, there was an exchange, right? And this exchange started with uh, German folkloric music, German traditional music, and then infusing with indigenous Mexican music, and there an opera from France, and Northern European countries as well, Italy, etc. And so that fused into arguably what's known as mariachi, and so that's part of the drama of how I see and hear the world, through music. And second, I think the impact that my culture has made in growing up, as a cultural impact on my creativity, is the fact that we were very inspired by the import of uh, exported music. One of them was ABBA and Swedish music specifically, right? So as I grew up, I spent summers in Mexico and Michoacan, and so Michoacan has arguably the biggest port in Mexico. So a lot of the music came directly through there, and so it would come as Beatles, according to my father, Beatles records, so British music, Swedish music, and so on. This happened in the '60s and '70s, and so this community were huge fans of uh, um, European music and European pop music. So that's, I think, how what led, in a nutshell, my upbringing and looking at music as global as opposed to uh, um, geolocated.
Hmm. So with that, I mean, those were your upbringings in terms of listening, and what was sort of what you were surrounded by. Was there any picking up instruments at a young age or any type of playing happening?
Yeah. So I think I believe I've had a predisposition. I think the question that I can answer is I do understand that I had an innate uh, predisposition is probably the best word I can come up with, in the way I understood how sound translated into feeling. And so we didn't have access to immediate, like, recording equipment, or high end instruments, but my parents were able to scrap up, and neighbors and community organizations were able to assist in aligning the instruments for me to learn.
Hmm.
And through this process, I think, it's as simple as, like, when I was a kid, I heard stories of I was dropping, like, plates and dishes to see how it would sound, right? And then I would notice the timbres and the different sounds, percussive instruments of stuff falling or breaking, and so that's how I was starting to feel and understand how to recognize sound as cross sensory, limbic exchange, right? So I felt something every time I heard something. It resonated deeply within me, and that's how I think I gravitated towards, towards making music. But unlike, so the uniqueness of like where I grew up and why that matters is to show and highlight that it doesn't matter where you come from. If you really want it or you really crave it, you'll find a way, theoretically. So I wasn't introduced to music as a formality, as an art form, as a, it was, I grew up in the hood, right? So it wasn't like, hey, you should aspire to be prolific at what you do, and encourage and motivation. Not really. No, it was more of a desperation, right? It was
Mm,
more a survivalist instinct. It was more of, I have to do this. I don't know why, right? So all these
mm,
things combined inspired me to push forward and keep trying to figure out why I connect so deeply with with this music more than words, right? Than the language, right? So it is arguably one of the oldest non-linguistic languages as well, right? Mathematics being the other.
mm. So then, with your surroundings and coming from a place of really resonating with sonics, really resonating with sonics, tied to connecting with your emotions, how did you then transition to discover the process of creating music?
Yeah, it was more of deconstructivist perspective. So I kept hearing music, and you hear these stories. It's very similar to a few of my colleagues, in which you listen and you desperately want to try to find out how it's made, and then you start. So I essentially started with what are the primary instruments that I need to learn to get to creating a song. I got tired of being granular, right? Like, in other words, playing one instrument at a time. And this is age 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Where I was trying to figure this out. I was having existential conversations with myself. So it was a very weird kid. Uh, and so I lived in an internal world rather than external. And so I was obsessing over the idea of, I didn't know there was production. I didn't know there was such a thing as a career, right? Doing this, right? So I just kind of started from this neotness perspective of like, can I just figure this out? And it was the songs that I kept hearing in my house, at my house, right? So I grew up to these records that were imported, right? ABBA, and thanks to my parents, they worked so hard, but ultimately, a lot of the parenting came from the music I heard, and I just wanted to replicate that feeling. I just wanted to replicate that to the world. If it can do, it wasn't as specific as, I want to make a hit. It was came from a pure sense, non-hedonic, I should say, not pure, non-hedonic. I wasn't chasing after something, only that I wanted to replicate this. So basic instruments I realized were drums, bass, guitar, keyboards, and vocals. That's it. So that's a pop orchestra. From there, okay, how do they work together? Well, first let me learn every instrument. Right? Let me figure out what the theory. Then I realized there's theory to it. Then also on top of that, there's culture to it. Right? Each instrument has its own culture. Right? So a bass player, if you're a Bootsy Collins fan, you'll play like Bootsy or inspired by Bootsy, and Motown, etc., and beyond. Right? Soulful bass playing as opposed to um, technically proficient mostly. Right? So that's what I started then looking into, and so I learned music theory, fragmented theory, right? Wherever I can pick it up. And then second is the soul of the instrument, right? The culture of the instrument. So drums, and John Bottom fan. Like I was so I understood players. I understood what they do. So I was trying to mimic desperately what they were doing. And then once I got to that point, I was like, can I? There's a couple of tape recorders around the house. My neighbor has a 4-track. Can I borrow this equipment and put them together and see if I can record each part? Right. I didn't know it was sync. Right. This is me as a literary preteen, like 7, 8. I'm already trying to figure recording my instruments and songs and in pieces. I inherit like a broken sampler here and there, and just figure it out, right, from friends, neighbors, etc. So it's communal. So that's how I figured it out, and then little by little started making demos, kept going at it, singing my own parts. and going aggressively. Equally, it was applying to every music school I can possibly get into, and there were these government, like they're called ACE PACE programs, or magnets. So at the same time, I was doing the kind of learn, trying to get formal and trying to get done as much as I could. So it's kind of, yeah, multi tiered adventure and journey.
Wonderful. You mentioned the comfort that you found when listening to these records that you had around the house, and then sort of, yeah, like transitioning that to the exploratory part of the exploratory journey of discovering creation. I imagine that there would be a lot of sort of like hardships and challenges to, like eventually to accomplish what you have been able to accomplish in your career. What were some of the hardest moments in your journey to becoming a renowned producer, artist, educator, and how did you overcome those hardships?
I think I think I had, I credit my parents a lot to this specific answer. And I was talking to them the other day because I was never close with my family. Um, and, but I did appreciate their unique approach to life. And so they come from hardship, you know, and what was baked in me really early on is fortitude and resilience. And you hear these words, but let me just paint a picture. So when you say this very peacefully, right? You say this as almost a meditation, and I love the way you speak, Elmo. My version of this is a little bit more. It's like warfare, almost, right? It is survival, like survival, triaging, and get back up and fight. That's how I was brought up. So music was used as a way, at times, to, this is almost sounds silly, but as a way to, we worked a lot as kids, so we had speakers around the house, and I remember my father would use music, Beatles and mariachi, to wake us up so we can get to work, right? And this is as kids, right? This is what immigrant parents do, right? They work, and so do their kids. So at a very young age, every when I'm not in school, I'm working on with my father and my brothers, and just um, nonstop. And so music was almost like a what is that famous trumpet piece when you go to war for the U.S. Army?
Oh, um, dun, 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 dun. Was it that one?
Yeah. So
I
so
don't
the- so
remember
so so it's a siren song,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it's same for the way I saw music originally, right? It was both a call to action, a call to war, and it was also a hug, right? My anthropomorphic mother, father, brother, sister, right, or best friend, or someone I envisioned I needed at the time. So it was these two things, and I can call on these two things just like as easy as an actor does, laugh or cry. And I think that is what that's how I developed this superpower of being able to transition from, you know, I see sometimes on my Wikipedia will say polymath or in different lectures, and the reason why that is because of this very trait that I can snap between different mindsets in in a short and almost instantaneous perspective. That comes from music and how it was. I saw and I interpreted what music can do, right? And a lot of times I hated it. I would say the majority. I think it's like a Pareto's law: 80% of the time I hated it, but it was worth the 20% of joy and
Hmm,
you know equanimity, right? Like
hmm,
you felt as you were transcending. It was a place of enlightenment, much like deep meditation is. And still to
hmm,
this day, I was thinking about how I approach my day, and I do so many things, but I still play. It's all I've done is I managed to turn my hobbies into income streams,
hmm.
right? By being prolific at them, right? So it's a
Hmm.
lifestyle. But I hope that answered your question. I think I
Yeah.
steered away from it,
I
but
mean, speaking of income streams, speaking of industry, the music industry has a reputation for being quite shrewd at times, and it really is the balance of art and commerce. How did this sort of battlefield mentality help you navigate the industry?
well, let me give you the history of this, right? So this is not a very uh, known understanding of the arts industry, right? Let's just look at all the arts, right? So specifically starting with like painting and music. So pieces of music, when it became a commodity, essentially when there was a revenue mechanism or system built into it. So we look at what propagated the distribution of art, right? Church and the monarch, right? Kings, queens would pay for art, commission artists, and so would the church, right? So over time, the church and the monarch, as contractors of artistry and artists, evolved into private capital, and this happened in around the late 19th century. So like and early like 1920s when it's formalized around and after in the middle of World War II was formalized, but it was then evolved into a capitalist market space, right? So private capital came in and replaced metaphorically the church and the monarch as propagators and purveyors and contractors of artists, right? So specifically, now let's narrow into the music industry. So the commodity was specifically sheet music. Then in the 20s, right, we have this transition, 20s to 40s transition into a recorded medium. And then all that changed in the mechanics, the revenue stream, the business modeling, all that changed was the distribution, right? Private capital still controlled the ownership of these commodities, sheet music, recorded music. So you push forward to like, the distribution mechanism evolved, right? But I should say the distribution mechanics evolved, right? So CD recorder, tape recorder, like to now streaming, but the ownership hasn't, right? Although the ownership now is I wouldn't say monopolized is a strong word, but it's heavily derivative of corporate interest, right? Shareholder value. So it's technically public traded, but it's still in a sense capitalism, and what it is capitalism in a very sense. But so what that has lent itself into is the understanding of the value of art hasn't changed. I think that's the key, as opposed to thinking so I see this as myopic, right? We keep going back to the asymmetries of economics in our industry, basically how musicians are getting effed, right? Yes, yes, I agree with that. I agree that the asymmetries are very, very tilted towards private capital, like 100%, or public capital at this point. But I think the real opportunity lays into rethinking the value proposition of what art is. You see, this is where I'm working. This is where I now have caught up to what I do. So
Mm-hmm.
I teach world leaders, global leaders, creativity as a skill, and
Mm-hmm.
intuition and instinct as a skill that you can develop. Why? Well, the reality is AI is going to catch. Machine learning is catching up. We're having multiple singularity points of machine learning, right? In which it's becoming very prolific. One at narrow problem solving, narrow solutions, narrow intelligence. At creative intelligence can become pretty prolific, right? We can measure that by how much you feel the output, right? In other words, limbic engagement of the output. Oh, I'm starting to feel something. It's becoming semi-conscious, right? Creative. And then, so we are hitting those singularity points. And the ultimate singularity point in machine learning, arguably, is consciousness. We still can't define it. So what I think the future of our industry is shaping up to be is I'm pushing for thought leadership from the creative class. So I'm building an institute for this now. It's called the Garibay Institute. I take musicians and we go and show the leadership communities around the world, World Economic Forum, uh, um, private leadership groups around the world that most people haven't heard of, and we educate them on what the value of musicians really is. Like, and it's not just making and putting content on these platforms, right? But there's a higher value proposition here. We can teach people how to unlock feelings. We can teach people how to to. Okay, I start with this when I give lectures and talks about how esoteric what I do is, and I simplify it this way. We can take 2 years and do cognitive behavioral therapy to get to the entry point of unlocking our inner selves, subconscious and unconscious, right? If you're a Jungian theorist, we can do 2 years of transcendental meditation to get to the entry point of unlocking our subconscious and unconscious. Take 2 minutes and 20 seconds of a pop song and you're crying.
Mm-hmm.
You're 7 years old again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's key, and that's something we should pay attention to as we're now um, aligning ourselves with, again, machine learning and how to use it effectively. We're looking at what the future of non-generative thinking is, which is how, arguably one of the protocols for machine learning. So that's what we're doing. I think that you as a musician have way more to offer the world than just content. So when I'm looking at asymmetries, this question, I'm like, let's rethink that. Let's ask another question. That's how I spend my time these days. Is I make hit records and I teach world leaders the value of this unique, called sui generis in Latin, right? Like unique thinking.
So, in these discussions that you have with world leaders, because I think there's a translation that can be sometimes hard to grasp for somebody who hasn't been in a studio, working in collaborative settings, really feeling what the energy
Yeah.
frequencies need to be in order to create some sort of a dynamic output that can draw emotions out of the listener or an audience or whatever it is. How are you finding these conversations? Do people understand after having them?
Oh, that's so difficult to articulate, right? Like there's very little words we have in our vocabulary. I have to look to Latin to try to articulate some of these terms, right? So there is a sensory language that's happening in the studio, right? That goes beyond our five senses, right? So if let me start to answer your question. Let me give you some background. So on my understanding of I'm not going to get into the consciousness argument, but I'm just going to kind of put my draw the line in the sand and plant my flag. I'm both materialist and non-materialist in thought. I'm both. I keep an open mind, I should say. That's probably better. The essence of what happens in the studio taught me this, that I can articulate down to, because I've mentored so many people, right? So in different communities, from MIT and Harvard graduate students to streets of Compton producers to Jamaican producers to songwriters to you name it. I've been and I've mentored for the very reason of obviously trying to help our community and of musicians and creative class, but to understand how and what's universal. And what's universal is this sensory language that we communicate in, right? And that's unique as well. So if we look at the essence of how our brain is interpreting the world, one is through stories, but the other perspective is that we're filtration devices, right? We're filtration systems. For example, in our senses, we could only hear auditory, right? So in an auditory sense, we could only hear 20 to 20 kilohertz in theory, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. So if you're a producer, you understand this because you see this visual. You always are cutting off 20, right? Because most speakers do not perform under 20 hertz, right? So though we can easily feel at a concert, speakers do go below 20, right? 20 hertz, right? So that's where the bass is, right? It's like where subharmonic, where you don't hear it no longer, you feel it. Go to a movie theater, a good system would have this information, the subharmonic frequency information. Yeah, we're very clear on that. We do feel that. That's kinesthetic. Our bodies shake. Our eyes start to like rattle, like move around, right? Like you feel your body vibrates. So it's very clear to producers and songwriters and musicians in the studio who do this every day that information exists, right? So how is that not quantified into our daily existence? How are we not using that information or the extension of our filtering devices to everyday life and problem solving? That's where we sit. I'll give you another one. So apparently we can't see beyond a certain range of the color spectrum. Well, white has theoretically every color in it that's possible, but we can't see it. We're not clear of that, right? If you put it under certain filters, we can, right? But yet we are interpreting this information subconsciously and unconsciously, right? And then the more we train ourselves, we can become more clear and bring it up to your prefrontal cortex and have a little bit more clarity on this information, right? So this, and then how we communicate with each other as musicians, right? You just have to nod and you know exactly what you're talking about to each other. You've been in
Mm-hmm.
sessions and bands and like ensembles and same when writing music, you get on the same wavelength, right, of
Mm-hmm.
understanding because you can communicate beyond the mutual understanding of the relationship. In other words, let's say you have two people who understand chord theory or scales, right? You know that when you go to a dominant, you'll resolve to one, right? The root, right? So that's it's going beyond that conversation. It's going into like, how did you know I was hearing that chord like key change, right? Is it some buried harmonic information in that of that note that is we're both alluding to? So that's what I'm saying is the real strength here is more nuanced than people think,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are communicating beyond the known five senses, right? And I'm not looking at this as a extrasensory conversation, right? I'm talking about this as a skill that you can learn and develop. To
Mm-hmm.
be successful in the studio, you have to be aware of this, and then have to be aware how that information can move feelings, right? Your limbic system, or your whole body.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the challenge then becomes how do you make a lay person understand what that feeling is, that connectivity is, and how to, get them to feel it? Because I can imagine if you bring somebody into a session to witness, to participate, there could be some kernels, some seeds planted in terms of them really understanding what that is and what the feeling is. But then, how do you define the value?
So I frameworked this out. So I'll give you a cross-reference version of this. So when athletes who have been performing for years and trained the skill, they can uh, predict behavior to a certain extent. So much as a tennis ball is coming at them at 100 miles per hour, they can hit it before their conscious brain reacts, right? And it's far beyond, our brain is delayed, right? Arguably like 50 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds. So this goes beyond that timing. It's 2 seconds to 3 seconds that these athletes are performing ahead, right? So it's very significant. It's beyond our measurable altitude, right? We can't. It's difficult to measure this stuff, but so I show them. That's what I do. I bring them into a space such as my studio, and I show them. So I do. I have this. I love this model. It's not even mine. It's show, do, tell, right? So I show them. So I do it. Sorry, do, show, tell. I'm dyslexic. So I do it. I show it. Then I tell it. Right. So that's why I think this is where online courses fail. Right. It's very difficult to walk to physically, kinesthetically, right? Walk an individual through this process. Right. Musicians do it too, right? So musicians like you're playing beyond you can't think at that point. You're playing seconds ahead of your mind and what you want to do. Like so that's when you're get to that point of where you're channeling. So that's how I do it, and I structure it in a way that um, I don't work with. I work with people who are already prolific at something, so it's easy to at that point uh, distill and pull as a comparable, right? So if I have like maybe a C-suite individual who leads the largest organization in products, they're high performers already, right? All I'm doing is paralleling what they do in a way that they can see and pushing their growth by showing what we do,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then outlining the higher value proposition that the creative class has equally in that sense. Does that make sense?
Yes. Um, in these other disciplines that the people that you work with come from, there is something that people are still, I guess, trying to define in some podcasts that I see and just in literature, which is flow state. And I think flow state is a huge part of that connectivity to just that. okay, yeah, like that's it. We got that. Like something's happening here and it feels really good. I don't know exactly how I got there, but I'm just within an hour I have something incredible. Does flow state exist in those other disciplines as well that you found, and was there some, as you said, like an added value that the creative experience has than some of these other disciplines?
Absolutely, I think you nailed it right on the head there. The Okay, so the flow state measures at what the theta brainwave states. There's five brainwave states, and there's derivatives of this model, but for now, let's just look at a theta brainwave state and flow, and just quantify it just very simply, so I can simplify this in a way that I think we all can grasp and relate to is when you're no longer thinking about what you're doing, right? You're kind of the happiest, right? There's this quantumous feeling that you get when you're talking to your best friend or your significant other when things are great. They're like you're no longer thinking. You're not even coexisting. You're like one. You're unified. That same feeling can be shared with an instrument of expression, right? So a microphone, um, a woodworker working on a guitar, right? A carpenter working on building, creating furniture, designing furniture, a painter putting paint to brush to canvas. So so that's the feeling. And if you can, and again, there's parameters. Nieheim and Csikszentmihalyi, like I'm brutalizing his pronunciation, but he put a framework around this, and you can practice getting into this state. But arguably, that the rules are that something should be just challenging enough so you don't think too much in the process of doing it, right? And it maintains your interest. There's a balance between curiosity and pain, right? That leverages. So I think everything has that state, whether you call it flow or you call it a meditation or a theta. I think that's a linguistic, that's a semantic issue. What I'm hopefully conveying effectively is that it's a skill that we can all develop in everything we do, right? Making the perfect cup of coffee or making, like, whatever it is that inspires you, right? Know that you can prolong that state by recognizing it. That's what meditation is too, right? Is prolific meditators. It's like in music terms, it's a certain vibe, it's a certain essence, right? But you can describe it as like it smells, feels like something. Oh, I remember that smell and feel. I can dial myself back into that. So you can go into a meditative state like that. Same thing with this idea of flow. Is that whatever you do, put a mental timestamp to it, and oh, that's what it feels like, smells like. Actually, if I you know, go back to the same room where I did it and keep doing this over and over, I'll prime myself and make it easier to get into flow, right? And so that's this priming effect that happens. That's what I recommend. That's part of the gift of being able to sit in the same posture in meditation, because it primes your body to recognize that as kinesthetic information that'll trigger meditation as well. You see?
Yeah. Yep.
Same thing holding a guitar, right? Or same thing holding an instrument. Same thing. Like it's all the same thing, and I think it's the most blissful experience of humanity it's like one of those gifts, like turning a shark upside down, right, rubbing its belly, like it's no one's immune to that.
Hmm. So, I mean, one of the things that I realized through my path in terms of just like the way that I listen to things, um, and I'm wondering this about you too because you've it's kind of like when you listen as a consumer to music, you listen to a piece of music as a whole, and you're not so much paying attention to the layer breakdowns and sort of like it's almost like you're kind of like stepping outside of the matrix or something like that. And then I guess as far as you're like as you have gone in terms of the analytics and like breaking everything down, and in trying to teach it, does it strip some of the joy away from like that moment that you were a kid as a listener, like feeling the comfort of just these ABBA records, these Beatle
Yeah.
records, and just being like, wow, like this is amazing, but now it's sort of like really like breaking it down in terms of the like the layers and the creative processes and everything. I wonder, like, does that do something to the joy behind it all?
That's a great question. Really good question. Very astute. So the it happened in stages. So the first stage of becoming great at what I was doing, um, and still do to this day, right? So I don't believe I don't really teach. I show, right? So I show by doing. And I guess that's a form of education, but there's a misunderstanding what teaching really is. In my belief in it, at least. And as I develop curricula for different communities and curriculums for different communities of education, I have this in mind. This very question: when is the joy removed? The whole essence, the reward mechanism. That when is that removed from the process? Well, to answer that, I could just look at my experience, for example, as a litmus or case study. The first stage of what I went through in understanding my craft is learning it, so I can go in the matrix, right, and look at the code, the source code of what I'm working on. Once I was looking at the source code, I started recognizing the source code in everything, right? Music specifically. Let's look at music, for example. And I can how you go into this AI platform and you can take every instrument out and isolate instruments and
Yeah.
vocals. Okay, it's kind of the same thing I would do with my ear, right? It's a skill. Like a lot of musicians do this, and so then I kept doing it so aggressively as a kid that it would remove the joy of, like, oh, I can no longer enjoy the song because I know exactly how it's done, right?
Mm.
But then over time, I was like, yeah, I can live with that, right? It's acceptance of there's no other way. And then I started like needing a break from my work, right? Like I'm 24 hours, 20 hours in. I need to get out somehow and go back to remind myself why I got into this. And it's a bit in my framework. So I'm able to teach how to zoom in and zoom out,
What are
right?
your rituals for that?
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a learning curve to that you should adopt. I'm all for this. That where you spend some time in just living in source code. Right? It's a metaphor for understanding the deep root of what you're working on and how it works and how you create new code, derivative of the past, and hopefully creating new non-generative code. And then once you pass this mark, whatever you decide what you need to get back into meaning and purpose and why you do this, kind of like the graduate level course, it can happen 2 years after you do work on your craft aggressively if you're starting from ground zero, or anytime in your career, like you choose. Like you remove and stop listening analytically and critically, and start feeling where this takes you. That's key. Schopenhauer says if you show if you can draw a line between the void of your childhood and what you end up doing for the rest of your life. So go back there, right? Listen to music that takes you back to that place, right? And then you're no longer thinking, you're feeling. You're like limbically and kinesthetically engaged. That's what zooming out is. So it's almost a fuel. It is, a cognitive fuel source. You're rewriting narrative and reminding yourself of your narrative and meaning and purpose and why you do. Right? So these are real skills that you can learn. And yeah, I'm hoping to keep teaching that part, or sharing, I should say, that part, that experience. Right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. We have one more question before the rapid fire round.
Okay.
Um, is there any advice you could give to upcoming music creators?
That's. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I was going to say that is very general. So I'll give you what's on my mind right now. Let's debunk the idea that we must create as our main form of revenue stream. Create output specifically to our art form, right? Because when we rethink about what true creation is creating new ideas, creating anything new. That's creativity, right? The ability for the brain to create. That's how I define it. So let's adopt, rather, not a side hustle mindset or anything of that extension, but more of a, I think, a more premier financial model, which is a portfolio lifestyle. You should have multiple lines of revenue to support, because the current economic uh, uh, um, scenario is not profitable whatsoever for musicians. Right? It's not made to be profitable for musicians. Right? It's meant to. I should say, it's not meant to do anything. It's evolved into this asymmetry, right? So very simply put, is think about having multiple lines of revenue like a portfolio. So you have, like, let's just say, for example, you sell products on Amazon, you have an eBay, Etsy store, you have such, this is simple, or you use AI to create new copy, you use AI to create new generative art distribution mechanisms, right? Like, you create the art and you find a way to distribute it. So that's what I mean. This is all part of your portfolio of existence. It's still, in a sense, musical, right? You're still creating. That's the idea that I love right now.
Perfect. Rapid fire round.
Hmm?
Question 1: what DAW do you use and why?
Oh, yeah, that's easy. So I love Digital Performer because I'm a native, right? I've been using it since the beginning of my career, and I like seeing the linearity, like the whole. It's like a movie score. It's made for scoring. So it's very. I see stuff in very linear. Like, here's the beginning, here's the end,
Great.
and then I like Ableton because it doesn't do that.
Hmm.
Right. So when I'm ready to structure something, I go to DP, Digital Performer. When I want to freestyle, like no rules, like no boundaries, Ableton, hands down.
Beautiful. Favorite plugins?
Oh yeah, Shadow Hills for uh, it, just drop it on anything. Like any of the Shadow Hills mastering, UAD is really good. Uh, what else do I like? I like the Rolly stuff for synths a lot right now.
Hmm.
Mind you, I have a wall of analog synths, so this is very complimentary. Uh, yeah, I like stuff that sounds like nothing on earth, right?
Hmm.
So that's that. Those two are my two favorite right now.
Great. What is a sound that always brings you joy?
Oh, I think if you describe it, is there's two things. There's two, like a nylon guitar. Like, think of, like, reverb nylon, like classical flamenco nylon. And the second is a CS80, like with phaser string, like, or yeah, in that Gary Newman world too, like that. That's a polymoog, but that sound.
Awesome. How would you rank your music creator skill sets out of 10 for the following? Beat making.
You're forcing me not to be humble. I mastered all these things, so I think, I created. I was, yeah, I'm a 10.
Lyric writing.
Oh, that's a good one. It depends who's in the room. So I mean, I'm gonna just skip all these. I'm a 10 in all these things
Okay.
because I am I if the marketplace has articulated by value, I've had hits. So yeah, I'm prolific at these.
Gotcha. What is your reaction or facial expression when you know you made some heat?
Oh, I'm like a kid. I'm more like I'm like, I told you. I'm like, come at me, bro. I told you this is real. That's my
Got,
expression.
got it. What is the secret to staying relevant?
Understanding who your audience is. Understanding who you're making music for.
Gotcha.
Beyond innovation.
What do you think will be the next technology that will impact the future of music creators?
Oh, that's here already. Yeah, it's definitely AI and machine learning, without a doubt.
What's next for Fernando Garibay? Anything you want to promote?
Oh, just the Garibay Institute. If you want to learn more information, and there's going to be more content creating on the idea of this, what I call non-parallel creation and sui generis creation, is like, if we're going to need some help, and the world's going to need some help in rethinking the value proposition for humanity, right? Like, what do we really, once we get to a place where, you know the microprocessors are there to support like a fully conscious machine learning and AI, then what's left? Well, I think we're always to be symbiotic. My hopes. I'm a positivist when it comes to this, but we can leverage a creative class to new heights,
Mm.
right? And so that's what I'm inspired by. That's what's next, as a bit of a authority in this space, I would say.
Great. Final question. How would you define the word sonically?
The character and essence of the inputs for the auditory cortex.
Hmm, that's wonderful. Fernando, it's been an honor and a pleasure. You have shared so much, and I think our audience will be able to really download a lot of the stuff you said. A lot of it is forward thinking. A lot of it is stuff that people might not be thinking, but they should be thinking about. I think with technology, um, yeah, I think the question that I have on my mind is with the advancement of technology, will people still create music in the way that they currently are? Much like painting, I wonder. But I'm sure you have your own thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think up for the next at least 10 years, will be symbiotic. I think we're going to evolve to essentially maybe two dichotomies, two worlds, right? The ones that keyword, and the ones that is, you know are more symbiotic with the, in other words, like raw material sourced through AI, and you create composites of your playing, and so on and so on. That's happening now, but it's going to be very prevalent in the next 10 years, 5 to 10 years, I should say.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing where we're at in 10 years. Hopefully, and I would love to be able to talk to you like this again and see see where we're at, like were we were we did we do the right things? Did we have the right conversations and that type of thing? So
Yeah, that's very accurate. I'll have my avatar get back to you on that, and you'll interview my avatar next. But maybe it's part one. But we'll continue this conversation perhaps.
sounds great. Cool. Well, thank you once again, and yeah, our community thanks you.
Oh, thank you,
So
Amal. Thank you so much for having me.